meeting is for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Frank H. will be sharing on the undeserved gift for 50 minutes. Frank, thank you for your service and for your willingness to share your life with us. We are delighted to have you here with us at God's meeting. At this time, help me give a warm welcome to Frank from Santa Paula, California. His home group is Prime Time. Welcome, and over to you, Frank.
Okay, my name is Frank. I'm an alcoholic, and that's not all. I'm a product of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was raised by a long-timer alcoholic sponsor, and my life in Alcoholics Anonymous is essentially been involved in his life my first 11 years of sobriety. Alcoholics Anonymous started for me back in 1953 when I went to meetings with my father. I was his insurance policy so he could get back in the house. My mother wasn't going to let him back in until he went to AA, and I was the reason he got back in the house. My father would take me there and plant me by the donuts, and I'd sit there eating and wait till he was ready to go home. Then I went home and told my mother he went. Anyway, it would be more than 30 years again before I entered the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I woke up on a Saturday morning and everything in my life was gone. My family, my kids, my business, everything, my house, the works. And I stayed homeless for 4.5 years. In that time, I managed to get a 30-day chip in my pocket, and I went to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought my life was over. Little did I know it had just begun. I had another problem besides alcohol, but primarily I used to drink a fifth of Stolichnaya 100% vodka every day. I tried not to exceed my limit. I say that. But anyway, I went to this meeting this night, and I wasn't going to go. It was raining. It was dark. December. The streets were wet. I had no windshield wipers in my car. I had all kinds of reasons not to go to that meeting that night. But I went. And I got there, and there were hundreds of people already there. I said, my goodness. Now, mind you, in that 30 days before I had a 30-day chip in my pocket, I was about ready to get a 6-month chip. And I went to the Alano clubs. Thank God they were there. I sat where they told me to sit. I did what they told me to do. They said, get a book, read a book, get a sponsor, go to a lot of meetings, don't drink no matter what. And eventually something's going to happen that you're going to like. I said, okay. So I was Mr. Eventually for a while. So I went to this speaker meeting, and I was just before I was ready to take a 60-day chip, and I heard this man speak. And he was taking a 34-year cake that night. And I was impressed by that. And when he started to talk, I listened to him, and he didn't talk like other people did. He talked about his God. He talked about a spiritual relationship with a power greater than himself. And as he spoke, he said one thing that just absolutely blew my mind. It was a mind-blowing thing. He said, after 2.5 years, he found out he'd been the same man sober that he was drunk. He'd been secretary of meetings. He'd been of service all over the place. But he realized that all the service in the world did not give him a spiritual awakening, did not give him a spiritual basis. He, like I, went to the meetings. He talked about his experience, and he went to the meetings, and they said, just don't drink, go to more meetings, get a sponsor, read a book, and everything's going to be all right. Well, he got my attention that night, and I didn't really know what to say. So I followed him from the meeting. Actually, I stalked him. I pulled my car up behind his, and I followed him right to the restaurant he went to. He got his coffee, and I walked up to him, and I stuck my hand out. I said, my name's Frank. I've got to talk to you about this God business. And that's all I could say. I hadn't been to church or Sunday school since I was a kid. I'd been drafted in the 60s. I spent 5.5 years on active duty. No God. I came home, and I went to school on the GI Bill. By way of history, and I worked my way through, and I passed the bar exam, and I started practicing law, and my life was taking off more or less. Anyway, so from a series of events, I became controlled by alcohol. Alcohol started to control my life, and not just alcohol. I had problems other than alcohol. And the only reason I mention that to you is because what it tells me in page 64, the 12 and 12, having been granted a release from alcoholism, why then could I not achieve by the same means? The same means, the perfect release from every other difficulty or defect. The same means, 12 steps and a power is what he was talking about. So a few nights later, I ended up in his front room. I just rolled in from the courthouse, and I was feeling kind of good, and I was glad to see him. And I sat down in his front room, and I said, "Congratulations on your cake for 34 years." And he said, "Well, thank you." And I shot my mouth off, and I said to him, if I had 34 years, I could do what you do, say what you say, and everything would be fine. He said, "Do you believe that?" He said, "If you believe that, why don't you go find somebody else you're going to listen to?" And I said, "I'm full of crap." He said, "We'll start with that. You're full of crap." And that's not exactly what I said, but it's, the ladies in the room. By the way, I have to tell you that I was a product of men's stags. I did not go to a lot of mixed meetings. I still don't, but I got a call from Tamara. And by the way, thank you, Tamara, and the group for inviting me here. I'm privileged to be here. I have talked to people in other parts of the world, and I see that this group talks to other people. I'd like to give a shout out to David in Sweden and DJ in Indonesia and a couple other people that are far away from me that I rarely see, but I talk to them on the phone. Anyway, so after I went to these stag meetings, I knew there was more to it than that I was getting at the Alano Club. So I went to stag meetings, and I found out that this guy was speaking and everybody was going to go. And I said, my goodness. So I showed up there, like I said, and I heard what he said, and I ended up in his front room. He says, "What do you know about alcohol? What do you know about recovery?" And now everything I say is about Alcoholics Anonymous now. My sponsor was a long timer in Alcoholics Anonymous. His name was Bob Anderson, is what his name was. And at the time, there was only one other guy that he was working with, so I had him basically all to myself. So my schedule was I'd get to his house about 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and I'd sit across his dining room table for 3 or 4 hours. And he taught me the program of recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous. He started in the big book. He went to the 12 and 12. And I was pretty well versed on those things. I knew my way around. And that's all I ask anybody I sponsor to do is know your way around so that we can talk about things. So when you open the book, if you have to go somewhere, you can find it. And one of the things he gave me to look at was AA Comes of Age, page 245 to 251. And I was raised this way. See, I just don't come up with ideas. He didn't just come up with ideas. He told me where I could find these things. And my experience and my evolution as a newcomer was sitting across his dining room table when he had a book in his hand, and he was poking that book, saying, "It says here." It says here. Now, he was an auto mechanic. He was a master mechanic, and he thought about things that way. He spent his life, he'd go out in the morning at 5 o'clock, he'd get in a van, he had full of tools, and he'd go out on the highways. He worked on trucks, and he worked on a lot of machines that in that time they threw jeans in there with rocks, and they ground them into light blue jeans or whatever they did, and tremendously high maintenance. So that's how he made his living. He was out every morning all over Southern California driving on the freeways, and he was back at night in the afternoon about 4 or 5 o'clock. So like I said, I spent most of my first 6 months in recovery at the end of a finger across the table, saying it says here. And he taught me. He took me through the big book in the 12 and 12. He took me through Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox. He took me through AA Comes of Age and Language of the Heart and these things. He took me there. But one thing he required me to read was page 245 to 251 in AA Comes of Age, which is Dr. Tebow's pitch at St. Louis in 1955, where he first exposed what he found out when he talked about the act of surrender in the therapeutic process, where he found out that he demystified the act of surrender, what happens when I hit bottom, what happens inside me when I hit bottom, what that was all about. It was about undergoing a surrender which reduced my ego and the mechanics of that. So, and the last thing it said on 251 is something that I carry with me today. It says, only through hard work and toil can lasting results be obtained. And I didn't get this thing easy, but I do know this. I was taken, and the next few days after that, he took me to the Roxbury Men's Stag in California, the oldest stag on the West Coast. If you're ever out in Beverly Hills, Roxbury was my home group, and it was his home group. And at that home group, I was there for 5 years. Every Wednesday night, I was amazed at the place. Like I said, this was long time sobriety in the room. He took me to retreats. He took me to workshops, all these things. And we were in the South Bay one night coming back from a meeting. And when he told me what the doctors had told him, his doctors told him he had a 5% chance to live to the end of 1987. I was 6 months sober, and I didn't know what to say or what to do. So a few days later, I was praying about this, and I said a simple prayer: God, show me how to comfort this dying man. And I didn't know up to that time, all that time, that he was running out of time. Neither one of us knew it. In all the hours he spent with me, he was running out of time. So with a prayer in hand, I found out what he liked to do. And one thing he liked to do, he loved to talk about AA. That was his life. He'd done it for over 30 years. That was his life. That's what made him feel good. And he had throat cancer. So every time he talked, he was hemorrhaging from his throat. So this was a situation that the only way he felt good and the only way he had a chance of living longer was to talk. And if he talked, he was screwing up what was going on with him. So he went into therapy and treatment, and he started speaking more and going to retreats. And every night we had something for him to do and kept him busy. And he had surgery in 89. In late 89, he went to San Lorenzo and he made another recording. We call it Roots. He was told, the doctors told him not to go. But all that time, one thing we did know, that the only thing that kept that man going was carrying the message to alcoholics, speaking, conducting workshops, all these things. So in 92, we went to Campo Mosqueda, Mexico, and the whole idea was to have a retreat and to come up with a writing, because we all knew that even the Bible didn't go anywhere until the Gutenberg press, until it was reduced to a portability in a written form. So we started in November 92. We went to San Lorenzo, which is a Capuchin monk friary up by the south of Santa Barbara. And he generated an oral presentation. And I recorded it, and I came back and I sent it to a court reporter friend of mine, his wife, who's a court reporter. And I got back raw data, and the whole idea, we started to work in 92, late 92, early 93, and trying to create a writing of his message. And it wasn't intended to become a study document. It wasn't intended to become an authority or anything. But it was the fact that he was living at my house. Every day we'd come out for a few hours a day, and I'd sit down with him. Now, mind you, he quit school at 15, and it didn't mean he wasn't highly intelligent, highly enlightened, and very sophisticated in his thoughts, but he had no vocabulary. As you can imagine, he quit school at 15, and he was a veteran. He was a Navy veteran. When he came home in 1945, he was home 3 days, got on his motorcycle, and had a head-on collision with a police car because he passed the trolley car on the wrong side, went through the windshield into the back seat. Now, that was his welcome home from his military service. And so he used to go to this one bar, and there was an Iceman that came in there every night, and he was singing and whistling, and the other guys in the bar would say to him, hey, Anderson, why don't you talk to him? Talk to Steve. He used to be like you, and he's not that way anymore. So in a very short period of time, Steve took him to Shire's dryer with bolt. They strapped him to a bed that was screwed to the floor, and he filled him with formaldehyde, and if he made it through the night. Had he not, he wouldn't be here. But that was his first day of sobriety. And as I think of it now, I can't believe that the guy who was strapped to a bed, screwed to the floor, saved my life, but he did. Anyway, he could only stay in Cleveland. He was a Cleveland guy. His sponsor was part of Clarence's crowd. And if you look at AA history, Cleveland was one of the 3 first groups. So he was getting Cleveland AA through Ed. So he had to move out to California in early 1953. He moved to California, and he started living out here. And he was sober for 2.5 years. And he went to a stag in San Fernando, and he heard this man talk. And he went up to him after the meeting. He says, "Why do you talk differently? Why do you say what you do?" And I was asking him the same questions because he didn't talk like anybody I'd ever known. And he said, "I found a God of my understanding is doing for me what I can't do for myself." And he said, "Well, how can I do that?" He said, "Just believe that I believe, and you can make a beginning yourself." And that's what he did. And before he knew it, he ran into another woman. This is a woman changed his life. A lady in a meeting he heard named Inez, her name, in El Monte, I think it was, in Southern California. And she gave him the Sermon on the Mount. She said she found God through Sermon on the Mount. Well, okay. Now, Sermon on the Mount was never on my radar, but I got a Sermon on the Mount, and I realized what he was saying. So I went to this guy's house. I was sitting in his front room, and I was buffing him up, saying, if I had 34 years, I do this, I do that, and the other thing. And he says, "Well, let me tell you one thing up front." He says, "I've got nothing on you," is what he said. I said, "What do you mean you got nothing on me?" He says, "All the time in the world doesn't do me a damn bit of good if that's all it is time. If all I have is the passage of time, I'm just like you are. I've got nothing on you. If I don't wake up this morning and say, thank you, God, for another day, if I don't take my Heavenly Father into my day as I work," and what he did, he was a service manager at a dealership, and he'd go there and he'd look at his watch. And every time he looked at his watch, he reminded himself how long had it been since he was talking to God. That kind of mechanical things. Master mechanic, mechanical things. He used tools. The tools he used was prayer. He said, although the 12 and 12 says that the first 2 steps are for reflection and the action starts in 3, he said, in my case, the action started before I began. In other words, before I started to apply steps, I never got anywhere until I learned how to pray. It's in essence what he said. He says, how do you pray? He wanted to know the mechanics of how I prayed. I said, it's easy. God, gimme. What else? You got to ask, right? Okay, gimme. I didn't know that I had to do more. There was more to it than that. So I naturally thought prayer was empty because all I knew was gimme. God, give me this. God, give me that. God, give me this. Give me that. My pinch hitter, Bush League pinch hitter. And I only went to him when I needed him. He said, what about a living God? A God for all your days, all your decisions, your mornings, your nights, your good times, your bad times. What about a living God in your life, every minute of your life, from the time you wake up till the time you go to sleep at night? Presence that you carry around with you all the time. Well, this is all news to me. And it's not something that I did. I was the accomplished guy. I didn't turn over, my will and my life to God overnight. Then and once again, starting in 92, we started working on this manuscript. It wasn't created to create a revenue stream or anything like that. It was just something to keep his mind focused on what we were doing. And I'd get up in the morning and get him breakfast, and bang, we'd be at the table. First, we'd be working on the manuscript, trying to convert whatever he had said into English, if you will. So by mid 93, we had the first iteration of the manuscript called Primetime Monks and Drunks. Let me explain about this primetime business. In the very beginning, he explained one thing to me. He said, what's the most precious thing that you have? And I thought, I was thinking material things, my car, my driver's license, all this kind of stuff. He said, life is the most precious thing that you have. Life. Living this life in this day, from the time you get up till the time you retire at night, it's life that you have. And if you don't have that, everything else we talk about is irrelevant. If you're not alive, if you're not possessed of the ability to do anything with your life, then Alcoholics Anonymous recovery is not for you, because Alcoholics Anonymous recovery program is the only thing that is going to sustain your life. If you're an alcoholic with alcoholism, you have no defense against it. And the worst thing about it is you've got a mind-powered problem. When you stop drinking, what is your excuse then for feeling bad? And by the way, in my case, I had a huge problem with powder. And the only reason I say that is because I went to the other places. Somebody mentioned CA tonight. And when I went looking for CA, I found it in the trunk of this girl's car. I mean, CA was not a very advanced society when I went looking for it, or the same with NA. But see, being an alcoholic, like I said, I was a drunk with a drug problem, but I was a drunk first. So I got the benefit of all of his wisdom. And the AA program he told me about started with the spoken word. Before 39, all the drunks, there was no book. There was no writings. So, when you look at, I reference Language of the Heart. When you go to page 198 through 200 in that area there, Bill talks about he went to Dr. Silkworth after being sober for 6 months, and he said, I can't keep anybody sober. And Silkworth said, well, look, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he said, well, I'm talking to him. I'm telling him that. And Bill had undergone, as the big book says, he had this blinding bush in a hospital, and that he found God at that moment. And he was going around telling everybody about his burning bush. And Silkworth said, look, I've tried to tell him that you've got a two-part problem here. You've got the physical knowledge, you got the mental obsession. Now, I have a choice. Either I'm going to engage those two things or I'm not. Now, I can quit drinking, and my question with him was, okay, I'll just stop drinking and doing drugs. Okay, well, then what? He said, well, how do you stay stopped? Can you stay stopped? And I didn't know. And I was not feeling too good. I was shaking it out like you do. I get a kick out of some of the people here. Like I said, Alcoholics Anonymous is the recovery program that saved my life. And I sobered up in 1986, if that'll help you. And I sobered up almost all that time with a long-time AA sponsor. He took me to long-timer meetings. And I would go to him with these meetings. And they didn't talk like he did. Nobody talked like he did. Because he was always talking about God doing for him what he couldn't do for himself. He was always talking about the grace of a loving God. He was always leading me to the second appendix in the big book where it says, most of our members find they've tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify as their own concept of a power greater than themselves, okay? And he was always showing me what my problem was the way I thought. And along the way, there was a joke. And he liked to tell me jokes because I was a stone-faced fool. I was not happy at all. I didn't like being homeless at all. I didn't like being where I was at all. And I was going through discipline, prosecution, all these things, like you do when your life falls apart. And he told me, there was a joke about, they called it the butcher shop, where the guy walks into the butcher shop and he looks in the window and it says, pig brains, $2 a pound. Cow brains, $3 a pound. Way over on the other side was alcoholic brains, $2,500 a pound. And he says to the butcher, he says, man, that alcoholic brains is some expensive stuff. And the butcher said, do you know how many alcoholics it takes to get a pound of good brains? That's what he said. Anyway, he kept me laughing all the time. And like I said, let's get to the other part. So he went into therapy. His surgery was in March of 1979. And he went into therapy, and he tried everything under the sun to avoid this surgery. So he finally went into surgery in March of 1989. By November, we were back at San Lorenzo. And if in overtime, I'll try to get that recording to you. It's called Roots. And that's where primetime in essence started, because the way he looked at it, when he talked about the time of his life, the best part of his life, the best time of his life, when he was talking to God, when he was in a relationship with his God, that was the very best part of his life. So slowly but surely, we got out at 1979. 88 rather. We got to 89, and he had a surgery. He comes out of his surgery, and we go to work on the manuscript because he had a long rehab waiting for him. And a manuscript we put together is called Primetime Monks and Drunks, and that was it. So the manuscript went out and it went all over the place. We couldn't make them fast enough, and like everything else in AA, in around me in Primetime, it's for fun and for free. Nothing's for sale. If I offer something to you, I will ship it to you. I've got manuscripts. Whatever, if there's anybody that wants one, I will ship you one, no charge. Along with DVDs or CDs, whatever I've got at the time. Because I was told that this is a God-given thing, and I didn't show up here to get a job or to make money. I showed up here to be the man God wanted me to be, and the man God wants me to be brought me here today to carry a message of substance, to carry a message that works, so that people don't have to be like I used to be. I was restless, irritable, discontented. I was argumentative. I didn't get this God business real easy. I fought all the way, but no matter how much I fought, he was always there for me. He took time out of his life, even when he was dying. He took time out of his life to give to me. He was never late. He never had any excuses. He never failed to show up. And he was the only one that had this life and death problem. The rest of us, we didn't have this problem. We didn't live with this imperative that he had. And he kept going and going and going. In 91, we had a retreat at Campo Mosqueda. He was suntanned. He was out in water skiing on the water. A year later, he has no hair. He's back in chemo again. And the doctor's just talking that 5% chance again. At the end of 92. By 92 and 93, so we kept working on the manuscript. And eventually, we started calling it Blue Clay, based upon Sermon on the Mount, the preface in Sermon on the Mount, where Emmett Fox cautions. He says, where he says that these are all lectures that he gave. He didn't write a textbook. Sermon on the Mount are transcriptions of the lectures he gave. Let me take a drink. Out here. Basically, three admonitions there. One, don't think you can get it all when everything they're saying in there with one reading. Read it till you get it. Number two, as you read, claim divine wisdom is powering you and is reading with you. So divine wisdom can reveal to you what you're reading. Read with God. Don't read alone. And the last one is respect the blue clay. And the blue clay in there talks about the diamond mines in Africa, where they used to dig up diamonds in yellow clay. And then they kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and they came upon what's called the blue clay. And in the blue clay, they found as many diamonds in a day as they found in a year in the yellow clay. And the whole idea is the farther you push, the deeper you go, the deeper your inquiry into spiritual substance, the greater the gift you get. And it's endless and spiritual. In the fourth dimension, it's spiritual. I live my life in time, space, and mass, 3 dimensions. I found out that my salvation is in the fourth dimension. It isn't limited by time, space, and mass. That a spiritual awakening is what I'm after. The title of my talk tonight is The Undeserved Gift. I didn't qualify for the life that I have today. I didn't qualify for the good life. I didn't qualify for 35 more years of sobriety. If they had a Vegas line, I was on the short end of it. There was money change in hand in the Alamo clubs, whether I'd even survived 1 year, much less 35 years. But the reason I'm alive today is because I listened to what he told me, and I tried the very best I could to do it. And when I failed at it, he stayed with me, just like now. I've got people I sponsor. They're trying very hard, but the thing is, they're still trying. As long as they're trying, I've got time for them, because I had my sponsor. He was out of time, but he always took time. Whenever I needed him, he was there for me. He was always there. And out of that, he talked about the best time of his life was prime time. It was the best time. So when you say prime time, what you're really talking about, what that really means is there's a methodology here, talking about alcoholism, ego, and self on the front end of the steps. He taught me what the unmanageable life was, that my problem wasn't just alcohol. It was the way I thought about things. It was my undisciplined thoughts and matters like that. So we started a stag in 91, September 30th, 1991. We started the Primetime Men's Stag. The first month it was named ABCs for Life, because that's how we referred to what he talked about. His message was, there's certain basic things that you have to have. Being a mechanic, tools, parts, stuff like that. He was almost like he used the force on cars. I swear he could put his hand on the foot of a car and he could diagnose what's wrong with it. I mean, he just listened to it. He knew he was that good. So what he did is he equipped me with tools. And the greatest tool he equipped me with was prayer. He taught me how to pray. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't trust prayer. I'd left my church way behind me when I was in the military, 5.5 years. I left, there was no God in my life. And I just thought it was a hoot. Orthodoxy was a hoot. And he showed me that it wasn't. And I learned over time in many years that men of prayer, people of prayer are strong people. Men of prayer are men of strength, spiritual strength, and that there's no weakness in somebody who prays and that kind of stuff. I don't know if I'm muted or not. No, I'm not. I'm sorry. So he went through 94, and then 95, I believe he got married again. Everything that he used to be given away was free, now wasn't free anymore. And the only thing that I know of right now that's free without charge is that manuscript. But the manuscript, like I said, the manuscript was basically a vehicle that was used to focus his attention on his message, because that's what gave him strength and substance. Working with other people, working on the manuscript, talking AA. That's what he did. He lived till 1997, and I was blessed, because 10 years after we found out he wasn't going to make it through 1 year, 5% chance of doing that, he lived 10 more years. And that has to be because of the people that came into his life that loved him and prayed for him. It had to be because God wanted him around to show us more about what he was talking about. And like I said, the words we gave, everybody had a handle more or less. We went down in South Central Los Angeles. I ran into a guy named Ray down there. And we circulated a small version of the Monks and Drunks. We called it a pocket rocket. And he became Rocket Man Ray. Ray passed a year ago, December, after handing out about 500 of those. I mean, the whole idea with the homeless people were getting the regular manuscripts, and now all of a sudden they're missing page 14 or 25 and all this. So we had to come up with something that the homeless could carry with them, and so he came up with something that fit in the pocket. So that's why he ended up with the pocket rockets, and you might hear about them around prime time. But prime time doesn't mean it's better than anybody else. It's just the best time of his life. And the best time of his life was his last 10 years, because in that last 10 years, he reached more people than he'd reached the previous 25 years. And what with what's going on now with Zoom meetings and all these other things. Who'd have thought I could come into the den on a Saturday afternoon and talk to people all over the world? I mean, that's incredible. And having the opportunity to do that is just mind-boggling to me. And no matter who you are, where you are, you can do this. I don't care if you're a retread or an untread. It doesn't matter. Thing is, and I will make myself available to anybody who's having trouble with the steps. I can help you, but you're going to have to go the road I did, and the road I went down is I was taught. And when we set the stag up, it was set up instead of one way. We called it the front end. The front end meaning before you began the steps, you had to have some prayer in your pocket. And I know the big book, the 12 and 12 says they're only for reflection. My sponsor said, reflect this. If you don't have a God in your life, nothing's going to change. And then he gave me a few things to look at that he got a Sermon on the Mount. I had to build a new character, I'm told. Everybody said I had to build a new character. How am I going to build a new character? Well, he says, okay, on page in Sermon on the Mount, it tells you how to build a new character. Prayer is the only thing that builds character. Write it down. And I did. Prayer is the only thing that changes character. Okay. And he asked me, how do you pray? What do you do? What do you say? This thing. And he taught me how to pray. Because I was saying I was coming from the wrong place. I mean, I was gimme. You know, just ask. Like, turn it over. Okay. Take it, God, all that kind of stuff. That's not the way step 3 works. But before I could get anywhere, the steps I did 1 to 12. He explained it to me in numbered order. He said, for guys like me, so I won't get lost, is what he said. So before I began the steps, he made me get honest. He said, I never thought of making honesty, tolerance, and true love of man and God the daily basis for living. And he said, when you said you were powerless over alcohol, I said, yeah. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, I don't know. And I didn't. When I said I'm powerless, you know, I admit that my life is unmanageable. What am I admitting to? I don't know. I mean, I didn't know what I was saying. I was a yes man. I said yes. I went to the club. You have powerless over alcohol? Yes. Is your life unmanageable? Yes. You know, can you come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to a sound mind? Yes. Yes, man. And they left me alone. Get a sponsor, read the book, go to more meetings. Eventually, something's going to happen. That's all I knew. It wasn't good enough for him. He would not accept that from me. He said, what is the unmanageable life? I said, I don't know. He says, try alcoholism, ego, and self. And then he turned me loose on AA Comes of Age, 245 to 251, where it talks about, what happens when you hit bottom. He demystified hitting bottom. When he said, you know, I have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, is what he said. He didn't say anything else. That's all. And before I began the steps, and that's what we did, what we had at that stag was a medical sledgehammer. It was an aggressive whack. It's the same thing that Bill did to Dr. Bob in the Cyberling Roadhouse. He had that medical sledgehammer that Dr. Silkworth had given him, and he hit Bob with it. And that's what happened in the Cyberling Roadhouse. And that's why shortly thereafter, on June 10th, 35, AA came of age. Well, I didn't really come of age till 55, until World Services took over, and Bill Wilson essentially was out of a job. AA came of age in 55. But nonetheless, Harry Tebow had a very important thing that he did, because he demystified what happened when I hit bottom. It produces a surrender, which reduces the ego. Then 2 more things showed up. The ego has marvelous recuperative powers, and the sophisticated thing he says was surrender. It is an essential disciplinary function and experience. That's what it says on 245 to 251. That's why Tebow is so important. It's a disciplinary function. What does it tell me on page 88 of the big book? It says, we alcoholics are undisciplined. So we let God discipline us. The simple matter we've just outlined. So I have to learn how to become disciplined. I have to learn how to pray. These are things I had to do before I was allowed to get into the steps. Because once I got into the steps, when I could say that I am powerless over alcohol and that my life is unmanageable, I'm being truthful, because when I first said that, I wasn't. I was just saying it to get you off my back. But I just want to tell you that the new guys are here today. Congratulations. Welcome. You don't have to live like you did. You don't have to suffer. You don't have to wonder, where am I going to do? How am I going to stay alive in my skin? Those are the thoughts that I had. How could I walk with dignity again? How could I be trusted? How could I be respected? With my family and my kids, my grandkids. How can I be a man that looks up at the sun and I can feel that every afternoon I sit here in front of this window that's in front of me. As the sun goes down, I feel the sun on my face. And I know that the reason I'm alive today is because I'm God's child. And because a man took time out of his life as that time was ticking away to make sure I was okay. It really chokes me up when I think about it. Because I didn't know he was dying. He didn't know he was dying, but he knew what he had to do. He had to take time out of his life to make sure I was okay. So that's why today, if somebody needs me to do something, I got time. I've got time. Because time was given to me. And in his case, the best of him was given to me. And that's what prime time stands for. For me to be the best I can be is only in a relationship with this power greater than me, so that I can be the man he wants me to be. And he talked about steps. I said, what do you know about steps? He says, and I said, they're stuck on the wall of the club there, and they're in the big book. That's what I know about steps. Okay, he says, I said, they're just kind of stuck up there. And he said, steps grow. Steps don't stay just words on paper or the wall. Steps grow in a relationship, in an application with God, in a method of living in dependence upon this power greater than me. That changes the way I think. It changes the way I do things. In dependence upon this power. And it's that dependence that allows my character to change, and it's that change of character which allows me to be the man God wants me to be, because the relationship is there. And steps are a product of application. Excuse me. In closing, I'd like to thank the group again for letting me come here. I'll come back anytime you need me. I'm not used to having my name in lights, though. I'm an old traditions guy. I was raised old school. And it's not that, everybody does it now, but like I said, that was unusual for me. But to come here tonight and to reach out for those who have been less fortunate than I'll tell you now, don't quit, don't stop. You're entitled. You're entitled to do one thing, and that's to allow yourself to change your mind. Keep an open mind. Don't close your mind. Look what it says after the second appendix in the back. It says it's a principle that cannot fail to keep me in everlasting ignorance, and that's contempt prior to investigation. My head will automatically tell me you don't want to go near this stuff. My head kept telling me, well, this guy's kind of nuts. Listen to the way he's talking funny. And he wasn't talking funny at all. He was telling me the truth. I just didn't know what the truth was. So I kept reading, and I read Language of the Heart. AA Comes of Age. I read it almost every day for a year. If you're having trouble with this surrender business, pick it up and look at it. You got nothing to lose except all that confusion going on between your ears. Because alcoholism is a thinking problem. It's not just a drinking problem. If it was just a drinking problem, you could quit drinking and the problem goes away. Why doesn't it go away? Because I've got a busted brain. That's why. And when alcohol wasn't enough, I enhanced it with other things, other chemicals. Because that didn't change when I came to recovery. And I said to my sponsor, well, He said, now you're, get into AA, apply the steps, become an AA man. He said, what's an AA man? He walks straight, talks straight. He doesn't hustle, doesn't work anybody. He's up to nothing more than being the man that God wants him to be. That's what an AA man is. And I have many friends like that. They're AA men. And there's AA women too. Don't get me wrong. I was raised in stags. I didn't have a lot of window dressing in the meetings I was in. They're all men. And we're all serious, and each one of them knew that it was the message of a living God that had them there. And each one knew that they had a chance in life. And that's what I knew about myself. Of all the things that my sponsor told me, and he used to tell me a lot of things that made a lot of sense. He said, before your life, before the end of your life, you're going to come to believe one thing, and one thing only. And he says that you're going to find the best thing you ever did was identify as an alcoholic. Thanks for letting me share.